say I'm so thankful for being here this week. The President Bishop Hargrove for having me, and my dear friend Pastor Sanders for inviting me. I'm thankful. I was listening to him sit there and say these things, these nice things about me. But I have to tell you, from the day I met Pastor, I was overwhelmed by many things, but I was overwhelmed by his humility.
Amen. Amen.
For someone who has done so much and led people for so long, it is a breath of fresh air to see someone who's not beside himself.
That's right.
So I want to thank God not only that, but for his embrace of people. And I'm grateful to you, man. I thank God for you and for your friendship and for how. And let me tell you, it's always good to have people who encourage you and who always push you and make you feel good. And so before this, we saw each other at the homegoing service of Dr. Gardner Taylor. And I was so glad to see you, man. And my wife was there with me. It was a blessing, man.
We still got a Delaware day.
That's right. We coming, man. And so it's just good to be here. I'm telling you, I don't have to preach. I can just sit here and we can just talk and basically just play, and we can have a good time. Because let me tell you, I had to leave. It means I had to go to a meeting this morning in New York City. Mayor de Blasio created for the first time in history of the city a clergy advisory council, where the faith community, clergy, would really influence and make recommendations for policy in New York City. And I've been, and God, and the mayor made me as chair of the clergy council. And so this morning was the first meeting at City Hall, and so it was just powerful. But I had to get there, so I had to leave 5:30 this morning, drive back to New York City, but I didn't come back. And I'm glad one of our associate pastors, Pastor Willie Francois, drove me back, came back with me, and so I thank God for his coming. We didn't see it, but we were listening on satellite radio.
Me too.
What they call him, the minister in chief. Man, he was preaching. He was preaching. And we were talking, we were excited. But the historic nature of today, it was a very overwhelming moment. And you could not help but be filled with so much pride on many levels, as an African American, but also as a person of faith, to hear the President of the United States speak in such a powerful way from his heart about his faith and from his faith. You don't hear a president talking about grace and salvation and transformation. And we noticed something else too, and I don't know if the preachers picked it up. When we finally got here to Atlantic City, we started looking at some video. And you know, it is said that every time, and Pastor Willie noticed it, it is said that every time the president speaks, he has to speak behind the seal of the president. Today he did not do that. He spoke behind the AME churches. It was as if he understood the sacredness of the moment. And it was a powerful, powerful moment. I'm telling you, we chills, man. I mean, I never thought that people who question his blackness, what he told the world today, who he was, and showed that today. And man, when he started lining Amazing Grace, and he started closing lines. What is this? The president was closing the service. I said, go ahead, man. And you know, listen, let me tell you, and all the television commentators and the pundits were all overwhelmed. You know you bad when you preach and Don Lemon remember he black. You know he did something today. He said, man, all the boy Don Lemon couldn't stop. Lord have mercy. So it was a beautiful. Y'all pretty dumb. Lord have mercy. He remembered the day. I tell you, he couldn't stop. But it was a beautiful day for America. And so I because the world watched today.
Yes, it did.
The world heard the first African American president. And it was a powerful moment. Now let me just let you in on the preacher. Let me let you in on a preacher secret. They made me mad with me. Preachers hate me. Here's the secret. When a preacher does all this talking, that means he's not sure what he's going to preach. I decided to tell the secret. When the preacher ready, they come up and they start reading scripture. And they just start reading and go to preaching. But we hear all this preliminary conversation. There's some things in the works. You're trying to let the oh Lord have mercy. So yeah. So I let the secret out. The next time your pastor is talking a long time before the sermon, just say, help me. But I really enjoyed myself here. I kid you not, man. This has been a wonderful, wonderful time.
Amen.
So I want to look at something tonight. I feel I was talking with Willie, and I was talking about what we should talk about tonight. And as I was flipping sit down there, I never understood many years ago, Pastor, when my pastor, the late Reverend Dr. William Augustus Jones, was my pastor, and I thought that Dr. Jones was the greatest preacher alive when I was younger in college, until I heard Dr. Gardner Taylor. When I heard Dr. Gardner Taylor, I heard our mutual mentor, Dean Lawrence Carter at Morehouse College Chapel. And I remember someone asked him one time, what is the difference between Dr. Taylor and Bill Jones? He said, Bill Jones is a Cadillac. Gardner Taylor is a Rolls Royce. So the difference is when the Cadillac changed gears, you could hear it.
Yes, sir.
When the Rolls Royce changes gears, you don't even hear it or feel it. And I remember years ago, Dr. Taylor carried a small, tiny bike.
Yes, sir.
Smaller than that. But I used to sit there and I would go place to hear him preach, and I would see Dr. Taylor flipping through the Bible, and I used to say, I know he's not trying to find something to preach. Until I got to that point where I found myself flipping through the Bible. So when I was flipping, I was trying to figure out what to preach. But there's a passage that I want to just take some time and look at tonight. And I want to push you theologically. I'm one of those persons. I do not believe that when you enter the house of God that you want to check your intellect at the door. We ought to come to God's house to be stretched on many levels, and not just spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, psychologically. And I want to stretch us, push us a little bit tonight, because I think that if we are called to preach and proclaim, that we ought to always be pushing the people we are charged to lead to think theologically, and really think through what we believe.
Amen.
I do not think there's value in just simply always regurgitating what you were given. At some point, you have to wrestle with what you believe. Only in the wrestling will it become real for you. As I said last night, you do not want to live your life on borrowed ideas, borrowed testimony. You want to get to a point in your life where you have reason, not just reason, but wrestle through what you say, so that what you say matches what's in your heart. God. So I'm going to push us tonight. So if you would stand with me, reverence of God's word. Turn to Mark, the 6th chapter. I'm going to read tonight from the Message Bible, Mark 6. You all forgive me, I'm in the old Message Bible without verses, but it's the end of Mark 6. I'll start reading, you'll catch it. It's the scene after the feeding of the 5,000. This is the word of God. As soon as the meal was finished, Jesus insisted that the disciples get in the boat and go on ahead across to the Sea.
Yes, sir.
While he dismissed the congregation. After sending them off, he climbed a mountain to pray. Late at night, the boat was far out at sea. Jesus was still by himself on the land.
Yes.
He could see his men struggling with the oars, the wind having come up against them. At about 4 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the sea.
Yes.
He intended to go right by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and screamed, scared out of their wits. Jesus was quick to comfort them. Courage, it's me. Don't be afraid. As soon as he climbed into the boat, the wind died down. They were stunned, shaking their heads, wondering what was going on. They didn't understand what he had done at the supper. None of this had penetrated their hearts. Amen. Let's pray. God, we bless your name on tonight. God, just let your word fall fresh on us. Let it touch us, oh God, transform us, oh God, and then push us to a place, oh Lord, we would be our best selves to you. Not only be our best selves, oh God, but give us the direction that we might surround ourselves with people who want us to be our best for you. God, we thank you tonight. We thank you, oh God, for our president tonight. Giving him the strength and the courage today to be who he needed to be for our country, to become what it needs to become, oh God. Thank you, oh God, for the shepherd of this house. Thank you for his gift. Thank you for his compassion. Thank you for his heart. Thank you for his love, oh God. Thank you, God, for calling him to be a pastor. Now, oh God, we ask that you would let your word do its own work on tonight. And, oh God, we will make sure we give you all the honor and the glory because you and you alone are worthy. Thank you, Lord. We honor you, God. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Remain standing. Let me read that passage again. 6th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. As soon as the meal was finished, Jesus insisted that the disciples get in the boat and go on ahead across to the Sea, while he dismissed the congregation. After sending them off, he climbed a mountain to pray. Late at night, the boat was far out at sea. Jesus was still by himself on the land. He could see his men struggling with the oars, the wind having come up against them. At about 4 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the sea. He intended to go right by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and screamed, scared out of their wits. Jesus was quick to comfort them. Courage, it's me. Don't be afraid. As soon as he climbed into the boat, the wind died down. They were stunned, shaking their heads, wondering what was going on. They didn't understand what he had done at the supper. None of this had penetrated their hearts. Do me a favor, turn to your neighbor and tell them, neighbor, don't forget your evidence. Come on, turn to the other neighbor, tell them, neighbor, don't forget Your evidence. Amen. Come on, put your hands together to the Lord. Don't forget your evidence. There's something about this scene that for those of us who have a somewhat distorted view of our theological paradigms.
All right. Okay.
There's something about this scene that is troubling. And not for everyone, I would suggest, to submit, but it is troubling for those of us who have a tendency to think that somehow allegiance to God and commitment to Jesus guarantees safe passage. I'm going to say it again. For those of us who trust God, believe in God, follow Jesus, there's still some of us who have misunderstood the nature of God's engagement with us.
Yes.
And think that somehow declaring yourself to be a Christian means that you have been made immune from the inconsistencies of life. It was Frederick William Robertson who said long ago in the 18th century, he said that one who believes in God and follows Jesus must be able to stand in what he called the transitoriness of life. It is the inconsistencies, the episodes that don't make sense. It is the times you are blindsided, the assaults that come when you're not looking. It is when the things that you don't expect happen, and when tragedy becomes your disposition, when chaos becomes your companion, and calamity your sidekick. When those things happen in your life, you ought not think that somehow the presence of chaos, calamity, problems, trouble, misery is a sign of divine disconnection.
All right, son. All right.
Somehow you ought not believe that because you can call on the name of God, or even call on the name of Jesus, that then guarantees that you ought not go through anything in your life. But there are those of us who actually do believe that, Bishop. We may not admit it, but we do believe it. And this is why when we are assaulted by the unexpected, we find ourselves almost at the point of losing our minds. When things come our way that are unexpected, the unexpected tragedies, we find ourselves almost at the point of breaking. And we begin to have conversations with people that would suggest our faith is waning. But I will say it again, if you know God, if you believe in God, if you follow Jesus, that you ought not allow yourself to get blindsided by those inconsistencies, making the false assumption that you get immunity because you can call on the name of Jesus. And how dare you follow Jesus and think that somehow you can bypass what he could not avoid? But what is it about us that sometimes thinks that we can avoid the chaos, the calamity, the misery, the agony, the pain, and yet we follow someone that the prophets call a suffering servant? Well, if the servant is a sufferer and we follow the suffering servant, somewhere along the line we have to believe in his part of the course to go through some things in life. And I don't know who I'm talking to here tonight, but if you're here tonight and you might think that somehow you're going through is a sign and a signifier of divine disconnection, I need to bust your bubble, because that ain't the case. In fact, you ought to expect some things to come your way because you dare to lift up the name of Jesus and trust God. You ought to expect some unexpected enemies to show their face. You ought to expect some people to show up in your life to come and attack you. Why? Because you have the audacity, the unmitigated call to walk by faith and not by sight. And so you ought to see something. That is why when I am obedient to God, I do not make the assumption, oh come on God, I do not make the assumption that because my obedience is there, that there ought to be some reward for my obedience. You see, when I obey God, it is not with the expectation that God must do something to meet my obedience. Because before I became obedient, God already did something. been good to me. Tell somebody he's been good to me. Come on, tell somebody else he's been good to me. That's why they look at you funny when they see you break out in a shout and break out in a praise. Because if they walked in your shoes, lived your life, went through your agony, and realized that you're still here, they understand the nature of your praise. Tell somebody that he's been good to me. He's been good to me better than I could ever be. Hey, is anybody here this evening who can testify that it had not been for the goodness of the Lord that you don't know where you would be? That's why you don't act funny when things go wrong, because he walks with you. He talks with you. They were obedient to Jesus, and their obedience brought a reward, and the reward was a storm. Their obedience birthed an award, and the award was a storm. They were on the sea with it, straining against the oars.
Yes, sir. Well,
the apparatus to move them forward,
well,
oh, y'all gonna get this, was not working.
preach, sir.
The thing that would accompany their progress,
Yes.
they were struggling with. Oh, I wish you could get this tonight.
I got it.
The thing that should have propelled them forward
Well,
was keeping them still.
yeah.
They were straining
Strength.
against the oars.
Yeah.
Now, while they are straining,
Uh-huh.
Jesus is praying.
Yes, sir.
Jesus has just left feeding the multitude.
Yes, sir. Right.
He tells the disciples to go ahead on the other side.
Yeah. Well,
He goes up to have a conversation with God.
yes, sir.
To be able to eavesdrop on those conversations. There's only one time in the scripture we can really eavesdrop on a conversation in Gethsemane, and it's not the kind of conversation we want to really talk about.
Yes, sir.
Especially if you live in the illusion and think that Jesus always easily accepted the nature of the mission.
Come on.
That prayer conversation was not the one that propels your faith. Because even in that moment, Jesus is trying to wrestle with moving forward in the call. But he comes to a place of resolution that's connected to his obedience. Not my will, God, but yours. There's only another instance where we're allowed to eavesdrop on Jesus' prayer life, but it wasn't really a prayer. It was a declaration. It was prayer for the benefit of people's faith. It was there by the tomb of Lazarus. He begins to pray a prayer that I wish we all could pattern ourselves after. Because I'm weary of people who go praying to God with doubt in the back of their minds, who talk to God suspicious about the possibility of transformation with God, who come to God thinking whether or not God can really do it. And look at what Jesus says. He said, God, I know you hear me, because you always hear me. Oh my God. What would happen if the people of God come to God praying that kind of prayer? God, I'm not confused with whether or not you hear me, because I know you always hear me. But I'm talking to you so that when people see me move, they understand it is you who is moving and not just me.
Yes, sir.
Here we don't get the opportunity to eavesdrop.
Right.
But what we do see in scripture is that when Jesus comes down from sacred conversation with God, he's on a mission.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Every time he comes down from talking with the Father, he's headed somewhere. It is as if that in those moments stolen away from the multitude and his disciples, he goes for direction.
Well,
There's something to be said there, preachers.
yes, sir.
When we don't take time to get away from people to hear from God.
Say a word.
So here he is, he gets away and he comes down. And look at the scene, and I'll be done. But look at the scene. Jesus begins to descend from the lofty place of sacred conversation.
Well,
Disciples are on the boat encountering a storm.
yes.
As he comes down, he sees them struggling.
Yes. Come on.
And here's the part I want to leave in your spirit tonight. I promise I'll get out your way.
Take your time.
But he sees them straining.
Yes. All right.
Straining. struggling.
Right. Yes.
Maybe close to perishing.
Well.
And here's the part that assaults your theological assumptions.
Come on now.
It said, and his plan was to pass them by.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's there in the text. That means his intention when he came down from conversation was not connected to their situation.
Yes. Right.
Because his desire was to pass them by.
Right.
That means when he comes down from talking with God, they are not on his mind. Not only are they not on his mind, here it is, come on believer, but he sees them struggling and still intends to pass them by. I hope somebody's hearing this tonight. I want to stretch you theologically. So that means that there was nothing about their struggle that really made them want to pause. He was going to pass them by. Now the reason why I said this is a stretch for some of us, because there are those of us who are under the assumption that when you call on the name of Jesus, he will answer and respond. How do you handle it when you are in the pit of your hell, struggling with your own crisis? How do you feel, believer, when Jesus looks at you and keeps on walking? How does that make you feel to think that the Master could see you in your crisis and not be moved by your struggle and intends to pass you by? There's something about your theological assumptions that must now be discarded. I already told you we make the assumption that just because we believe in God, call on Jesus, that means we're immune to the inconsistencies and the tragedies of life. But it's doubled down when you think that in the midst of your dealing with the inconsistencies and the tragedies, that Jesus ain't even looking your way. See you struggling, see you groaning, see you headed, and still wants to pass you by. You mean there's nothing about my struggle, God, that would make you want to take pause and come see about me in the pit of my misery? There's nothing I can say and nothing you can see that would make you want to stop and help me. Grandmama said, if I call on your name in the midst of my distress, you will kindly help me. How can you pass me by? There's only one thing, though, that compels him, Willie, to stop. And it's not their crisis. It's their confusion. He does not stop because of their crisis, but he pauses because of their confusion. Can I help you here for a second? They have walked with me, seen me perform miracles, listen to me teach in the synagogue. They've been intimately connected to me. And you mean a little darkness and struggle has blurred their view of me? Oh, I wish you could hear this today. I've been there with it. They see me healed, deliver, and set free. But a little darkness and a little struggle cause them to misidentify me. Are you going to see this? They cry out, it is a ghost. Oh, you got to see this. While he's walking, he's looking, and he's passing by. When they cry out, it's a ghost, he pauses. He turns around. How could you think that was a phantasmal presence means more than divine interference. There are times when I don't really need God to do much. I just need to know he's with me. Because loneliness is more destructive than your enemies could ever be. And to feel as though you're going through storms by yourself makes the storm unbearable. God, if you don't even stop it, just knowing you're with me gives me confidence and joy and strength in the midst of my struggle.
Amen. Amen.
He says, don't be afraid. And then watch this. Here it is, and I promise I'll be finished. Watch it. He turns. He speaks to them. He reminds them who he is. The reminder comes, but he doesn't speak to the storm. The storm ain't the problem. But wind and waves know to obey. So here, he doesn't have to speak to the crisis. He speaks to the confusion in the crisis. The crisis will obey, but they are confused. This is why there are times that God won't touch your situation, but he'll touch you. He may not speak to your situation, but he'll get your mind right. To remind you that there's no weapon that can ever come against you, that can ever interfere with who you are. And here's the part, Pastor. I love Emmanuel. I love Emmanuel. I know we call him Jesus. That is Yeshua in the Hebrew. But Emmanuel. Oh my God. There is no coincidence that last week Dylan Roof went to Emmanuel. Oh my God. He went into the place that should have reminded him that those 9 people were not by themselves. Because Emmanuel means God with. So Dylan entered Emmanuel, but I love Emmanuel because the name Emmanuel speaks of divine contact. It speaks of the eternal not being afraid to enter the finite. It speaks about a powerful, transcendent God who enters the affairs of human beings. It is not so much God that he don't mind being tainted by the foolishness of human beings. And so there, Jesus could have dealt with them from afar. He could have spoken to the wind. He could have spoken to the storm. But to calm their spirits, he gets in the boat with them. Oh, you got to hear this. He becomes God with them. He is no longer at a distance, but he comes with them in the boat, in the struggle. And I got to help somebody here today who feel like you're all by yourself. I got to remind you that Emmanuel is with you in the time of your struggle. Even when you don't see God moving, it does not mean that God is not moving, because he is Emmanuel. Look at your neighbor and tell him he walks with me. He talks with me. God tells me that I belong to him. And when he got in the boat, it said the storm stopped. The wind ceased. Once he got in the boat, everything was fine and over. But then they were stunned, shaking their heads, wondering what was going on. Because they did not understand the supper. I remember reading this preacher and not understanding the connection here. But here it is, and I promise I'm done for real. I understand, Pastor Willis, why he was ready to pass them by. I learned this, that sometimes when you pray for strength and God does not answer, the first assumption is that God doesn't hear you. Bad assumption. When you pray for strength and God doesn't answer, It may be because you're already strong.
Say so.
It's not strength you need.
Yes.
It is the belief that you're already strong.
Yes.
God has given you what you need to handle the next crisis. You already have a litany of experiences that remind you
Yes, sir.
that God will not leave you or forsake you. I wish I had some witnesses in here. You did not get here without God having delivered you to this point. There's some of us in here right now who can testify through many dangers, toils, and snares that we have already come to this point. There's more than a few of us in here tonight who can testify that we've been in some sticky situations before. But every time we found ourselves ready to throw in the towel, God steps right in and reminds us who He is. I like the preacher this evening. He said, every time I turn around, He keeps on making a way. Every time I turn around, He keeps on making a way. I have experiences with God doing great things. My grandmother put it this way. She
Can't